By 5:30 p.m. on September 17, 1862, more Americans had died than on any other single day in the nation's history. Not at Pearl Harbor, not on D-Day, not on 9/11. In one cornfield, in one morning, in the time it takes most of you to finish breakfast. This is the story of the 12 hours America still hasn't fully reckoned with. Most people know the name Antietam. Fewer know what actually happened there, and almost no one knows why it happened the way it did. By September 1862, the Civil War was 17 months old, and the Union was losing. Robert E. Lee had just crushed Union forces at Second Bull Run. Confederate morale was high, and Lee made a decision that would define the next year of the war. He marched his army north into Maryland onto Union soil. If he won here, on northern ground, Britain and France were prepared to recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate nation. Foreign intervention, international legitimacy. The war, potentially, over. That's the stake almost nobody mentions when they teach this battle. This wasn't just a fight over a cornfield. This was the closest the Confederacy ever came to winning the war through diplomacy instead of force. So what actually happened when these two armies collided outside a small town called Sharpsburg? Let's walk through it minute by minute, because the textbook version leaves out almost everything that mattered. At 5:30 a.m., the fog was still sitting in the valley. On one side, roughly 75,000 Union troops under General George McClellan, a commander so cautious his own president once joked he had a case of the slows. On the other, just 38,000 Confederate troops under Lee, badly outnumbered, backs nearly to a river with no real retreat route. By every rule of war, McClellan should have won easily. He had Lee's actual battle plans, found wrapped around 3 cigars, dropped by a careless Confederate courier days earlier. He knew exactly where every Confederate unit was positioned, and he still nearly lost. That single detail, a commander with his enemy's entire playbook who still couldn't close the deal, is the thread that runs through this entire battle. Indecision killed almost as many men that day as bullets did. The first assault hit a 24-acre cornfield owned by a farmer named David Miller. What followed was some of the most concentrated killing of the entire war. Artillery fire was so dense that soldiers later said the corn looked like it had been cut down with a scythe, except it wasn't the corn that had been cut down. The field changed hands 15 times in 3 hours. 15 times. Entire regiments were reduced to a fraction of their strength in minutes. One Union colonel later wrote that in the time it takes to read a short letter, his entire formation was gone. By 7:30 a.m., barely 2 hours into the fighting, over 8,000 men were already dead or wounded in that cornfield alone. As the fighting shifted south, Confederate troops dug into a sunken farm road, a natural trench worn down by decades of wagon wheels. For nearly 4 hours, Union troops charged directly into it. It became known after that morning as Bloody Lane. When Union forces finally broke through, what they found inside the road has been described by historians as one of the most horrifying scenes of the entire war. A photographer named Alexander Gardner arrived just 2 days later. The images he took of Bloody Lane became some of the first photographs of American war dead the public had ever seen. For the first time, people back home weren't reading about casualties in a newspaper column. They were looking directly at them. By midday, the fighting shifted to a stone bridge crossing Antietam Creek. What almost no one mentions, the creek itself was barely knee-deep in most places. Union troops could have waded across almost anywhere along its length. Instead, for nearly 3 hours, they tried to force their way directly across a narrow bridge, funneled into a kill zone, defended by fewer than 500 Confederate soldiers firing down from the high ground above. It is, by most military historians' assessments, one of the costliest tactical mistakes of the entire war, and it cost the Union an enormous tactical advantage at the exact moment they needed it most. By nightfall, roughly 23,000 men were dead, wounded. More American casualties in 12 hours than the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Mexican-American War combined. Tactically, the battle was close to a draw. Lee's army was bloodied but not destroyed, and he was able to retreat back across the Potomac into Virginia days later. McClellan, despite having every advantage, let him go, a decision that would cost McClellan his command within weeks. But strategically, Antietam changed everything. Because Lee had been forced to retreat, Lincoln finally had what he'd been waiting for. A victory, however incomplete, that he could use as a platform. 5 days later, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Britain and France, watching closely, quietly abandoned any plans to recognize the Confederacy. One single day in a Maryland cornfield didn't just produce the bloodiest morning in American history, it rewrote the entire purpose of the war, and decided in large part that the Confederacy would never get the foreign legitimacy it needed to survive. Today, the cornfield is still there. So is the sunken road. Antietam National Battlefield has barely changed in over 160 years, which makes it one of the only places left where you can stand in almost the exact spot where this all happened. If there's one battle people misunderstand more than any other in American history, it's this one. Because the casualty count is the only part most people remember. The decisions behind it get erased. That's what this channel is built around. The parts of history that get cut from the textbook version. If that's the kind of history you want more of, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss the next one. And I want to know, do you think McClellan's caution was the bigger story here, or Lee's gamble? Drop your answer in the comments.